Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final lecture on epistemology. This is our post-lecture on KVSI Chapter 8, and we're going to talk about the study of knowledge and what tools we can use to improve our epistemology. With that, let's take a look at it. There are a couple of methods for the study of epistemology that our text covered. The most common, in a sense, is intuitions, and particularly intuitions about mind reading. Intuitions are these sort of gut instincts you have when you try to evaluate the world. And we have them all the time, right? You have an intuition that the door is locked. Right? You don't really have a fully worked out reasoning for it. You just have a gut feeling, right? Intuitions are pretty common. They're especially common when you make value judgments. Things like moral claims seem to really rely on certain intuitions. And there's a lot of what we've been talking about so far this semester that's really intuition loaded, right? It's about, well, this seems funny, right? This doesn't describe things the way we probably want it to. Well, that's all intuitive, right? That's all just intuitions talk. There's a couple of problems, though, with using intuitions. Now, our intuitions about attributing knowledge to other people actually seem to be pretty accurate in some sense, or at least beliefs. We have the skill called mind reading. And not the sense of, people at the county fair who are going to, do tarot cards or what have you. We're talking about mind reading in the sense of we have an ability to attribute to other people whether or not they believe something. And we're actually pretty good at it. We're pretty good at telling what information other people have. At least adults are. Better than other animals, anyway. However, our intuitions in general are what's called theory-laden. That is, what we think is likely to be true or gut true actually ends up depending a lot on our prior beliefs. And if that's the case, this makes our intuitions problematic for evaluating the value of a theory, right? So if you already accept the belief that, for instance, the knowledge claims should not vary across contexts, well, then you're clearly going to be an invariantist, and all your intuitions are going to be invariantist. And you shouldn't be surprised when your intuitions prove you right, because your intuitions are coming from the same place, the same system of thinking that you're trying to evaluate. There's another problem also which is called the egocentric bias, which is that while we're pretty good at attributing beliefs to others, we do have a hard time understanding the thought processes and rationality of people who have radically different belief systems from our own. These factors combine to make intuitions, in my opinion, a really bad system for measuring or for evaluating epistemology. The next approach might be what's called experimental philosophy, or X5 for short. Experimental philosophy essentially consists of sending out surveys to ask people about their intuitions. That's mostly what they do. They test intuitions and see which factors can influence intuitions. Effectively, experimental philosophy is very basic sorts of psychology stuff. You can tell by the way I'm talking about it that I'm not too enthusiastic about experimental philosophy because it's typically just poorly done psychology, and it's not clear why the intuitions of the masses should matter for a couple of reasons. On the one hand, right, it's not like physicists go around and ask people, well, what do all these non-physicists think? Because that's important somehow. On the other hand, it's still just intuitions. Even though you've got a whole bunch of them, they're still just intuitions. And it's not clear why we should put any epistemic value on intuitions. That is, why we should think that your gut feeling, or everybody's gut feeling, has anything to do with truth. The final and probably most promising route, in my view, is empirical psychology. Empirical and neuroscience all rolled up in here. The cognitive sciences more generally. We have certain tools we can use to assess the way that humans believe. But here's the trick here. We can find out how people think, and we can even assess things like what ways of thinking make us more likely to satisfy our goals, that sort of thing. But we're not going to find the difference between belief and knowledge through empirical psychology alone. Knowledge is a sort of normative term, right? It's about truth. It's about the way we ought to believe. That is not likely to be found in the brain. We can find how we do believe, and we can even find like how a healthy, normal human believes, but what if that's not how we should believe? Likewise, what if no human has what we would consider to be knowledge? Experimental psychology is just not going to be able to give us those sorts of answers. Some have suggested giving up on the study of epistemology, giving up on the practice of epistemology because of these concerns, that all of these methods seem to have fundamental flaws. Others have suggested, like Quine with his replacement naturalism, or Rorty with his replacement pragmatism, that we should just change the way we think about it. These are things to keep in mind as we ask ourselves, how can we improve our theory of knowledge? And as a corollary question, why does that matter so much? I think that there's a clear indication that in some sense it matters, right? Because believing properly is one of the most important things we can do. Whether or not that connects to this term of knowledge or is just justified belief or something like that, well, that's for further debate. But the biggest question for us, having encountered all of these problems and all of these challenges, is which path do we need to take to answer them? I think it's worth wrapping up what we've talked about epistemology with just sort of a short list of the big questions from epistemology. Number one, what is knowledge? How do we get it? What beliefs qualify as knowing? Number two, how do we justify beliefs? And how can we tell if a belief is justified? What systems do we use to generate justified beliefs? And how do we go about assessing our own beliefs for justification? Number three, what is rationality and how should it govern our actions? And this, by the way, is a topic we've talked about only very little. But rationality tends to be connected with justification in a sense of if you're justified in believing something, it's rational for you to believe it. Rationality and rational behavior is a very important corollary field, or at least part of epistemology, and one to think about moving forward. Next, number four, how much attention should we pay to social structures that generate our beliefs, and how much of epistemology needs to be done in context of a social framework? Number five, what do we make of more complex cases of knowledge? Right? We specifically focused on simple single-agent beliefs, but what about what's called group minds or group knowledge? Right? The members of a symphony together can know how to play musical pieces that no individual in that symphony know. The crew of a ship together know how to sail it in a way that no of the individuals on that ship probably know how to do. Likewise, what about non-propositional knowledge, practical knowledge, knowing how? Like, I know how to swim. Well, how do we go about analyzing that? All of this talk has been about knowing that, but knowing how, in some sense, might be even more important. How do you know how to walk? Right? And how should we go about analyzing practical epistemology? And our final question, how can we make progress on all these other questions? That is, what sort of framework do we need to answer them? And with that, we have completed our section on epistemology. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I know that we've been rushing a bit because we've been a bit behind. I hope that it was all accessible. I'll be putting up a survey to get some of your feedback so I can tell how I can move on improving the course as we move on to our next section, which is on ethics. I hope you enjoyed our discussion of epistemology, and I will see you next time.